Greetings and bienvenue, MITZU. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Moving out of my childhood home has brought up memories of the Shimpoze. I lived in this house for 23 years. We moved in when I was 10, and once I graduated college, I bought the place from my parents after they retired. I love this place, and it's a shame to leave, but the family is growing and we need more room for the kids. We got everything inside the house and the garage packed up, which left only the dilapidated old shed in the backyard. That shed. It hasn't been opened in over a decade. The old shack was crammed full of rusted tools, boxes, crates of dusty vinyl, broken fencing. My dad treated it more like a landfill than a storage space. After a while, we just sort of surrendered it to the mice and spiders. Fooling with it was more work than it was worth, and I couldn't be bothered to tear it down over the years. But now, vacating my childhood home, the last task on my list is to haul all the old garbage out of the shed to the dumpster we rented. Standing there, at the very edge of my backyard, I stared at the sad sheet metal structure with its roof half caved in. Knee-high weeds bristled up around its edges. A tree was bent over it, draping its leafy branches over the shed as if it were slowly swallowing it. I no longer had the key for the padlock, so I lopped the lock off with bolt cutters. I had to pry the door open due to the rusted-over hinges and was instantly hit by the stench of stale gasoline, dust, and mold. The concrete floor was blackened by all manner of mildew and rodent droppings. Faint light filtered through the lone window on the side of the shed, the glass panes having long since been spray-painted over. Maybe it was the smell that brought up the memories, or maybe the drab light that left the room a jungle of shadows. But a sinister memory bubbled up like a tar pit in the back of my mind. I was 11, or maybe 12. It wasn't long after we'd moved in. I still didn't have many friends, so I spent most of my time playing pretend by myself in the yard. I was a naive child, a bit of a weirdo looking back. But most of all, I was lonely. And so when, one day, having ventured into the darkness of the shed to play out another of the adventures I concocted, a quiet voice spoke up from somewhere near the back of the shadow-filled shed. I was quick to answer. "I'm new in town," were the first words the voice spoke. "Me too, kind of," I said. "My name's Roddy." What was this thing's name again? Christ, it's been ages. It started with an S, shrimp. Shimpoze. No, Shimpoze. He said he was the Shimpoze. I asked the Shimpoze if he wanted to be friends, if he wanted to come out and play pretend with me. Ha! Like I said, I was a naive kid. But the Shimpoze didn't like the sunlight, didn't like the fresh air. He wanted to stay in the shed, in the shadows. I ought to tell you right now that I never actually saw this thing. It was always hiding among the amassed piles of junk, always stayed concealed in the shadows. The Shimpoze was nice, polite even. I asked if I could get it anything. Food, water, a toy. Hell, I was just excited to make a friend. "A cat," the Shimpoze said. "To care for." "A cat?" I asked. The Shimpoze told me that at night he could hear the stray cats all around the neighborhood mewling and prowling through the woods behind my house, that he wanted to have one for himself because he was so lonely back in the shed. So eager was I to win over this new stranger, I agreed. He told me that I would need to lure them there with food, and, he stressed, he didn't want to get me in trouble, so I couldn't tell anyone. Fair enough. So, for the next week, I snuck cans of tuna from the pantry and sprinkled pink, flaky fish around the yard. I made trails, left tiny piles of tuna at 4-foot intervals leading out of the woods, through the unkempt grass, and around into the door of the shed, which I left cracked open. One day, I asked the Shimpoze if he had gotten his new pet. "You've done marvelously," the Shimpoze said. "I've got a new furry friend and I've named her Belle. But I can see already that Belle needs a brother or a sister. Would you be kind enough to bring me more?" I agreed, without a second thought. I repeated the process over the course of months. My mother, seeing the kitchen being cleared of tuna, bought more and more with each trip to the grocery. I was proud to be doing such a good deed, and with each week, the Shimpoze would praise my generosity and tell me of the growing litter of happy pets he was building. There was Belle and Louis and Oscar and Oliver and Dim, Daryl and Ernie, Arnold, T-Bone and Hash. I wonder how many cats over that year that I lured into the shed. Maybe dozens. It's hard to know. But now, at 33 years old, I'm dragging chunks of broken furniture and dead lawnmowers out of the shed, slowly uncovering the shadowy lair the Shimpoze had hidden in. With each foot of empty shed that I reveal, I uncover more and more skeletons. Their tiny cat bones are gnawed on and broken. Where there was once marrow, I found only hollow, sucked-out tubes. Old rotting flesh stained the concrete floor with black splotches. Patches of grey fur are caught in wheel spokes and piled up in the corners. I counted at least 20 carcasses of these poor creatures. Looking out the open door of the shed, I remember the last time I spoke with the Shimpoze. His lust for more and more pets had grown beyond what I could provide by luring in strays. Where once he was pleasant and friendly, he was growing impatient. He was no longer asking of me, but demanding. On one hot summer day, as the afternoon was dwindling down into evening, the Shimpoze told me to climb over the piles of junk. He wanted me to see him, wanted me to see the little colony of strays that he had given a home to. He demanded I shut the door to the shed behind me, so as not to let in the light. "Come here to the back," the Shimpoze coaxed. "I don't think I can make it back there," I said. "It's too crowded." "Have I not been your friend all this time?" the Shimpoze growled. "Well, yeah, but—" "Don't you want to play with me?" the Shimpoze demanded. I stuttered. Even to this day, I'm not sure what instinct in my gut told me to run, but I believe I owe my life to it. I slammed the door shut and never went back. The last I heard of the Shimpoze was a final howl of frustration so loud that it shook the sheet metal walls and made the glass pane rattle in its single window. My wife keeps asking why I'm determined to tear down that old shed before we sell the house.
When I was a kid, I experienced weird alien abductions. It started with a black, shadowy-looking figure. It first appeared in front of me one night around midnight in the kitchen of my childhood home from what was the back room. A weird room that was next to my mom's bedroom that had a cement floor and was just used for storage. Anyway, I know that the first event happened because the fridge was still open the following morning. I used to think it was a shadow figure or ghost or something, except I experienced it looking down at me in my bed on another occasion inches from my face. It wasn't until years later that I realized it wasn't a shadow I saw, but I don't know how to describe it, sort of like an alien gray is normally depicted, but different. I remember one event where I was in a strange place. It was like a very clean-looking place with clean halls and rooms. Lots of rooms. Except it wasn't pleasant. There was just screaming, lots of screaming. Behind one door I was led through was my mom, who was screaming in agony. I had been dismissing all of this for years because it just seems insane. But I was talking to my mother and discovered that she remembers what I thought was a nightmare, and told me how she's experienced weird things her entire life, seeing UFOs, etc. One night in the 80s, she was doing laundry late at night and was going back to her apartment. There was a bright flash and then nothing. She just came 2 hours later without any clear memories of what happened or why. Sometimes I wake up and my room is a mess, like a struggle was going on, but I don't ever remember anything but sleeping, not even any dreams or nightmares. Rarely I do have dreams. Often whenever I do, they involve weird events like being in my house going through a normal night, but then a bright white light appears and just nothing. I have more I can go into if anyone cares to hear it, but has anyone had anything similar? What do I even make of this and everything? Well, the very first event I can remember, I was sitting in my bedroom looking outside. I saw this bright red object in the sky kind of rapidly flying around. Looking back on it, it made no sense. When I was 6 or 8 years old, I had a specific nightmare that never changed. I was in the middle of my room. It was empty except for a wooden toy chest I had, but it was in the corner. On top of the toy chest was what looked like a stereotypical angel blonde hair, white dress. The doorways and windows were all pitch black, and in the dream I would slowly be drawn towards it. Its lips would be moving and no sound coming out. I would always wake up screaming before I reached it, but one time specifically I woke up to what I first remembered as that black shadow above me looking down. There was one time my mom and I left one night to go out with family. We lived alone, BTW. When we came back, the entire house was like torn up, no signs of forced entry, nothing taken. My room was the most bizarre as it had a plant moved and set on top of a table beside the TV. It was so strange, and nothing came of it when the police came. All kinds of strange things went on in that house, objects being thrown, voices, and strangely when I was about 6, I was looking from my mom's bed into the living room. I saw this clock on the wall, except it turned into a face and started morphing into different faces. I never understood that, or well, any of this. Going back to what I would say is certainly more alien than just paranormal. I remember a weird sound it's hard to put into words, like a metallic pulsing sound that would come from outside above the house. The dogs would always freak out whenever it would happen, and I always felt panicked when it did too. I've had strange dreams about aliens over the years, when I dream or at least remember them. One time they had invaded the Earth and were basically unkillable. They were just everywhere. All you could do was run. It certainly still happens. I hear that noise every so often. I don't know if it would be of any relation, but I've suffered with chronic illnesses and strange things in general all my life. Most recently, I had a rare type of cancer develop in my right thigh. I also get constant severe migraines. There's a lot I know I don't remember. In fact, I know there's at least 20 years of memories that are just not there. Sometimes little fragments come through, like the screaming. The sounds of screaming are burned into my memory. I do also have a constant feeling like they are coming. And weirdly, I have days that I know I've lived before. Even knowing what is going to happen outside anything I can know hours before they occur. It's confusing. I keep expecting something to happen, if that makes any sense, like knowing something big is coming, but not when... just... something.
I loved my hometown, but once I left, I never went back. I was 24 when I decided it was finally time to move away. I grew up there, graduated from high school there, and all of my family lived there. So in the weeks leading up to the move, I spent most of my afternoons walking around, seeing old sights for the last few times, watching film reels of memory play out at every street corner, reliving my childhood. The town is a dead oil village, a tiny one, with no more than 250 residents in all. It's been that way since long before I was born. The only open businesses are two competing oil field supply stores situated right across the street from each other on Main Street, right in the entrance to the town as you arrive on the only road. To get groceries or supplies or to have any kind of fun, the residents have to make a 10-mile drive to the nearest city. A convenience store in my hometown would truly be the pinnacle of the word convenience. Apart from the oil tankers roaring in and out of town on a daily basis, it's a very quiet, isolated place. To either side of Main Street, which runs dead center down the whole of the town, are neighborhoods filled with single and double-wide trailers, barns, farmhouses, and the occasional shack. Among them, the double-wide trailer that served as my childhood home. As you make your way further down Main, abandoned buildings are strewn about here and there, remnants of a time when the town had a bit more bustle to it. One of these, a large old farmhouse turned restaurant turned derelict fondly known to locals as the Soda Shop, has a block all to itself. When I was a kid, my grandmother owned it, and I spent a large part of my childhood behind its counters, munching curly fries and failing to stay out of the way as she and her staff worked their asses off to keep the place afloat. My walks took me down Main Street, inevitably past the Soda Shop, and time again I found myself staring through its windows as I went by and remembering the good old days. My grandmother had passed away almost a year prior, so I was shocked to see the shop had new owners, an Asian family, which was a strange sight to see in the oil deserts of West Texas. I saw them hanging out in the dining area, the mother bouncing a giggling baby boy on her knee, the father pacing huffily behind the counter as he seemingly searched for some missing item, the little girl laughing as her grandfather told her very grandfather-esque stories or jokes from his rocking chair in the corner. The mother's chair was closest to the window, and she looked up to smile warmly at me as I walked by, which made me smile back. I wondered why they hadn't reopened the shop yet, but I figured they must have bought the place as a residence rather than a business, since I remembered the store used to be a house anyway. Yet the "Sorry, we're closed" sign still sat hanging in the screen door, the same sign that my grandma painted by hand and allowed me to flip over every evening as she tidied and locked the place up. For some reason, that bothered me more and more as the days went by and my meanderings continued. I guess it was the picture of the sad face my grandma had painted on the closed side. If they weren't reopening the place, couldn't they at least take my grandma's sign down? As days went by, My misdirected anger about the sign slowly devolved into a steadily increasing sense of unease about the new owners of the shop. I started to notice what I considered strange things about their behavior, like the fact that I never seemed to see them in a different position than the first time I looked through the window. Woman holding smiling baby, man standing behind counter, girl laughing as old man tells some inaudible joke, or that I never saw a vehicle, or any signs that they ever left the house at all. Their actions looked genuine enough, like they were just your average family having a cheerful day at the house. The woman always smiled that same smile at me, always warm, sometimes even with a little wave. After a while, I began to look guiltily away instead of returning the gestures. I tried my best to convince myself I was being ridiculous, probably mixing the nostalgia of seeing people in the shop and the pain of how much I missed my grandmother up with the impression I had of some innocent family I had never met. I walked my Main Street path every day, stubbornly holding on to this logic, but the feeling that something was very strange about that family persisted. About a week before moving day, I was exhausted from packing, so I napped through the afternoon and most of that evening. When I finally woke up, it was almost midnight. I went outside to enjoy the breeze and a cigarette, and decided to take my walk late rather than never. I started on my path. The night was fresh and cool, and a pleasant breeze stirred the trees and brush that hugged the roadside as I walked. Bluish moonlight lit my path. Halfway down Main Street, I realized with an unwilling jolt that if I kept going, I'd be walking right past the soda shop at night, in a part of town with no houses or people to run to for help. I mentally kicked myself, both for neglecting to consider that prospect and for considering it to be a daunting prospect at all. I crested the Main Street hill, and there was the shop, sitting beside the road with all of its windows black, just like every other building and house in the town. Relief flooded through me as I realized I had indeed been an idiot about the whole thing. The family just preferred a set routine. That's why they had always been sitting in the same spots. I always walked by at the same time, so it must be their family's social time or something. These people probably have lots of cultural differences that would go over my head. I also felt like the world's biggest asshole, as I realized how rude the woman probably thought I was when I had stopped acknowledging her. As I approached the soda shop with its darkened windows and sleeping inhabitants, I smiled at my own silliness. I felt better about everything than I had in days. Even the idea of moving seemed less frightening to me. I looked at the "Sorry We're Closed" sign on the door and remembered my grandmother again, and felt happy that they had it. It probably belongs with this place, I thought. It doesn't matter that it's not a restaurant anymore. It matters that it was, and that I'll always remember it that way. I decided to get one last good look at the interior while I could get away with it, for the sake of nostalgia. I pressed my face to the glass and waited for my eyes to adjust to the gloom. When they did, my heart almost stopped. The family sat still as stone in their usual places. Every single eye in the room was trained on me. The grandfather and little girl leered at me from their corner, and the dad was a hulking silhouette behind his counter. The woman and her baby were less than 3 feet away from me in their chair, and their features were just visible in the pale light of the moon. She held the baby up in the same adoring way she always did, and its head was swiveled at an insane angle to gape at me along with its mother. Their eyes were wide and white, no pupils or irises to be seen, and their mouths were stretched into surreal caricatures of the expressions I would see them wearing during the day. Her smile widened as I gazed in dumbstruck terror. I watched, paralyzed, unable to react, unable to move, as the woman rose from her seat with the baby in her arms. Their eyes never left mine as she made her way across the room to the front door of the shop, to the immediate right of the big window I was looking through. I tried to get my legs to work and managed only to stumble backwards a few steps. I watched the main door open, and her silhouette approached the screen to stare out at me with that hideous grin. I trembled as we stared, knowing I should be running, knowing that I was incapable of doing so. Dead eyes never leaving mine, expression never flinching, she reached up and flipped the sign. It now reads, "Come on in, we're open." I don't remember sprinting back to my house, but when I left my hometown, I never went back.
Childhood home is old. Constantly hear footsteps at night on the linoleum floor. Whole family is asleep in their rooms. I usually hang around the living room. See shadows moving through the house at night, always in and out of rooms, but they have a presence. My room has spots in it that are simply way too dark, almost unnaturally so. People who stay over at my house, friends, cousins, etc., always say there's something weird about certain corners of it. Dogs always hated my room and never slept in it, would bark at corner late at night. One day when I was about 15, I decided to go out since I heard someone rustling through our garbage. Our garbage is in an inner patio, behind a gate and a tall wall. It sits there until we take it out for collection. Feel this oppressive sensation that sickens me. For some reason, get a knife from the kitchen before heading over. At windows overlooking the hallway that leads to the patio, scared. Noises coming from trash. Stutter like a coward asking who's there. Childlike laughter followed by heavy footsteps. See the top of a dark, childlike thing's head running by the windows. I ran back to my room thinking someone broke in. Man up after 10 minutes and go check. No one is there. All doors are closed and locked. Steps were headed into the laundry room. Door is closed. No one is there. Parents didn't hear anything. No signs of anyone leaving the house or coming in. The bags were torn, and there were heavy things dragged around and turned on their side. It couldn't have been rats, as my dad thought the next morning. Other stuff. Room next to mine is connected to mine with a door my parents put there to watch me as a baby. People say there's a scary ass shadow on top of that door. Cousin won't sleep anywhere near the door since it freaks him out. Sometimes the shadow became lighter and the oppressive presence went away. This is when you would hear footsteps and shit being moved around the house.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.
There's also a Rumble archive as a backup.